This is a quote by James Cone from his book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. James Cone is a Black theologian who is often regarded for founding Black liberation theology, which is a recontextualization of Christian theology for the purpose of liberating those of African descent. This branch of theology would not be possible nor necessary if not for the racialization of Christianity. Historically, the religious experience with Christianity of both white and Black are based on either being white or Black. In other words, Black Christians became Black Christians because white Christians decided to be white Christians. And this is due to how racialized American society already was and the roots of the early church. This racialization has led to a continuation of a well-known political approach known as identity politics. Identity politics, as most things, is inherent to Christianity. Now, before that, what exactly is identity politics? A quick Google search to Wikipedia defines identity politics as a political approach wherein people of a particular race, nationality, religion, gender, sexual orientation, social background, social class, or other identifying factors develop political agendas that are based upon these identities. I think a good example of one is Bacon's Rebellion, where thousands of Virginian colonial settlers that consisted of European indentured servants and enslaved Africans united. The upper class and those in power did not like that very much, as they saw their authority at risk. And so as a response, they were sure to remind white rebels that they were white, and slaves they united with were Black. They continued to stir division among the rebellion, successfully extinguishing its efforts. The upper class weaponized the identities of lower class that were united to keep them divided. Another example is the French Revolution. Overall, probably one of the most violent revolutions in history, but the revolution was fueled in large part by a desire for political and social equality among different groups in French society. One of the key identities that was central to the revolution was the identity of the Third Estate, which represented the common people of France. The Third Estate was made up of a diverse range of people, including peasants, artisans, and urban workers who were united by their shared grievances against the French monarchy and aristocracy. The revolution also saw the emergence of other identity-based movements, including the women's rights movement and the movement for abolition of slavery in the French colonies. These movements were fueled by a desire for greater political and social equality for marginalized groups, and they helped bring issues of identity and representation to the forefront of the revolution. So identity politics in and of itself is not a bad thing. Every single one of us does it, and it can either be used for good aims or bad aims. In today's media, you may often see the term identity politics coupled with complaints about the woke, the left, and their over-reliance on social identity markers. But everybody has identity groups because on the right, this is identity politics, this is identity politics, and this is identity politics. We all do it. Now, I said earlier, Black Christians are Black Christians because white Christians decided to be white Christians. This fundamentally changes how Christianity is then experienced by these two groups. Similar to how it was in the 1st century CE, where we see this Jewish movement that was following Jesus of Nazareth and then would eventually cut ties with the rest of Judaism. Here in an already split and racialized society, the theological outcomes would naturally be in opposition to each other. Those in power, which would mainly be Gentile Christians that are part of the Roman Empire, would gradually develop more and more anti-Semitic theology and beliefs. This is St. John Chrysostom. During the 4th century CE, who was best known for his homilies and commentaries, as some Christians still took part in many Jewish traditions, practices, and observances, and even still meeting in Jewish synagogues, St. John said, no. Read this. This is a series of homilies called Adversus Judaeos, translated as Against the Jews. In the third homily, speaking about Jews, John states that, if then the Jews failed to know the Father, if they crucified the Son, if they thrust off the help of the Spirit, who should not make them bold to declare plainly that the synagogue is the dwelling of demons? God is not worshipped there. Or in the fourth homily stating, "But the Jews neither nor dream of these things. They live for their bellies. They gape for the things of this world. Their condition is not better than that of pigs or goats because of their wanton ways and excessive gluttony." Anti-Jewish rhetoric is filled throughout, and St. John Chrysostom is not the first or the last to deploy this sort of racializations on an entire group of people. This is only an example of the already progressing sentiments against Jewish people. Fast forwarding about 1,000 years later, and we get to Martin Luther. No, not Martin Luther King Jr., just Martin Luther. You know, the guy who nailed his 95 thesis to the church door in protest of the Roman Catholic Church's teachings and practices that would eventually lead him into being a major figure for the Reformation. Yeah, that guy. But one thing we often don't learn about him is that he was extremely anti-Semitic. You see, Martin Luther had a lot to say about Jewish people as a whole. In fact, he wrote an entire treatise called On the Jews and Their Lies. He no longer regarded them as God's chosen people, but children of the devil, and called for violence against them, for their homes to be destroyed, synagogues burned down, and so on. Many people, both in his time and later on, would take his words to the next level. From many early church saints to Martin Luther, the foundations for racializing a group of people were set and manifested itself firmly with Hitler and Nazi Germany. Now, I don't really need to go over a crash course of the Holocaust. I hope that we all know just how vile that was for Jewish people. But what's important is recognizing the narratives and racialized viewpoints in the Christian church that have inspired and have been used in support of figures like Hitler. Both St. John Chrysostom, Martin Luther, and many others were in fact quoted by Nazis in an attempt to convince the German Christian population in supporting the Holocaust. All of these racialized viewpoints of Jewish people would continue to shape how both Christians and Jews even interact to this day. But more importantly, it shaped many of the stereotypes and caricatures that a mainly Christian Western society has about Jews. If you want to learn more about misconceptions and myths, I personally recommend checking this website out, which goes on to debunk many long-held and damaging beliefs about Jewish people. I'll leave a link in the bio if you'd like to check that out. Jewish people, for many Christians and or conspiracy groups, are no longer regarded to as Jewish people or a Jew. No, it is specifically the Jews, which carries loads of negative connotation. For example, black people. That is how most African Americans are referred to and prefer to be called. That is what I prefer to be called. But there was a time where being called Negro or even colored was the more respectable and understanding thing to call a black person. But referring to black people as the blacks means something else, because you aren't just referring to a group of black people in that phrasing. Whenever I hear someone say that, I'm usually just sitting there with a big question mark in my head.
What do you mean by that?
And there are characteristics and narratives about black people that phrasing is carrying. Y'all get me? Now, I mentioned a few times already that black Christians are black Christians because white Christians decided to be white Christians. Similarly to church history, Jewish people became the Jews due to their racialization by Christians wanting to dominate and separate themselves as much as they could from Judaism. Neither of the passive parties in the situation chose the identities that they have. They were forced onto them. And as a result, they had to develop and construct theologies and viewpoints that would both give them meaning and hope to defend their own communities. For those imposing racialization on black people, there were many arguments made from the Bible about how black people are inherently subhuman and fated to serve. One of those things was the curse of Ham in Genesis 9, where Noah had cursed his son Ham's son Canaan to slavery, and that all Africans are a descendant of him. This was used by various Christians pre, during, and post-slavery as a justification. This passage originally really has nothing to do with African people in any way, but was used nonetheless because of the association with skin being blackened when cursed in the Bible, and really just proof that they can subjugate people. These racializations, even including manifest destiny, would continue on throughout slavery, through the Jim Crow era, and eventually lead to many white Christians having racialized theologies that are either continuing those traditions or simply acting silent on political issues, clutching onto their own individuality due to the discomfort of the past. In Divided by Faith, Emerson and Smith share that for many, the race problem, no matter how big or small, ultimately came down not to a social issue, but to personal defects of some individuals and some groups. This is an example of the hyper-individualism that white evangelicals in the 20th and 21st century take on in an attempt to separate themselves from the sins of the past. Anything problematic from a church father, a leader, or even their own founding fathers of this country now became an issue of their own individualism, regardless of the systemic effects it had on racialized people. Their religio-cultural tools, whiteness, is what they use to make sense of the various race issues in America. This is the lens in which they view these issues. With all that understanding in mind, race is inextricably tied to the differing theological perspectives of white and black Christians. Let's bring back James Cone for a moment. He said, "The cross can heal and hurt. It can be empowering and liberating, but also enslaving and oppressive. There is no one way in which the cross can be interpreted. I offer my reflections because I believe that the cross placed alongside the lynching tree can help us see Jesus in America in a new light, and thereby empower people who claim to follow him to take a stand against white supremacy and every kind of injustice. There is no such thing as black liberation theology without the black experience. There is no such thing as Frederick Douglass's I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ, and therefore hate the slave-holding, whipping women, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land without the black experience. There is no letter from a Birmingham jail without the black experience. There is no Harriet Tubman's faith and the Underground Railroad without the black experience. There is no James Cone's The God of the Oppressed without the black experience. And there is no general declaration that Jesus is black without the black experience. This reminds me of Genesis 50 verse 20, where it says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." And the way I view this in this context is that the very thing that was used to oppress black people was turned around by their own hand and made a tool for their liberation. These responses due to racializations are necessary for the survival and well-being of those communities. All of these elements are not limited to Jewish or black people, but any and all groups who have suffered to racialization under Christianity. The question that people must ask themselves now is, how do I go about my tradition? How can I learn and unlearn the various perspectives that have attributed to others pain? How can I uphold the Christianities that have been liberating and empowering for many, but also the enslaving and oppressive Christianities for others in tension? I surely do not have all the answers, and everyone's journey is different in how they relate both to liberating and oppressive ideas. For some, they find liberation in other avenues. For some others, they use it and they turn it around to be something to liberate themselves. If there is any lasting message I think people should take away from this, is that we should keep an open ear to those who are speaking out in marginalized communities. Personally, I'm grateful for all of the people I have met and been able to share life with, where we discuss our beliefs, stances, viewpoints, and perspectives. But more importantly, listen to each other when the other is calling something out that may be harmful. I just want us all to be better to each other. That's really all I care about. But thank you all for watching this video. I will leave links to different resources I quoted in the bio below. Please leave any comments on what you found interesting, questions you may have, or requests on what you would like to see more in future videos. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more content soon to come.